The Last Laugh. A story of what people underestimate and what gets left in a safe. She walked into that courtroom with everything she thought she'd taken from me. She walked out with nothing she thought she'd keep. Part 1, the kitchen window. The Georgia summer doesn't apologize for itself. It's humid at 11 at night, the same way it's humid at noon, the air sitting on you like something that decided to stay. I was in my driveway under the carport light, working a clay bar across the hood of a 1967 Mustang Fastback that belonged to a client who had been restoring it for 9 years and had entrusted me with the final stage. And the cicadas were loud enough that I almost missed my wife's voice coming through the kitchen window. Almost. 22 years of marriage teaches you certain things. It teaches you the difference between the voice your wife uses when she's talking to her mother and the voice she uses when she's talking to someone she doesn't want you to hear. It teaches you which laugh belongs to which version of her, the one at dinner parties, the one at the girls' trip that runs 2 days longer than planned, the one that cuts through August heat at 11 at night when she thinks you're too focused on somebody else's car to pay attention to your own life. I set the clay bar on the hood pad and stood still. We just need to be patient a little longer. Her voice was low and warm, the specific warmth of someone talking to a person they trust, more than the person asleep 3 rooms away. He still doesn't know about the lake property. The lake property. My father's lake property, 22 acres on the edge of Lake Hartwell in Anderson County, South Carolina, close enough to drive in 3 hours, far enough that I had been meaning to visit for the past 2 years and hadn't made the time. The property had passed to me through my father's estate 18 months ago. I had told my attorney to confirm the transfer and had not thought about it since, because the business was growing and the girls needed attention, and I told myself there would be time. I was hearing her talk about it to someone else. The appraisal came in at $480, Daniel. $480,000. A pause. He has no idea. He's always been like that, so focused on the shop he doesn't see what's right in front of him. Another pause, then a laugh. Not loud, quiet. The kind of quiet laugh that's more intimate than a loud one. By the time I file, everything will already be in motion. Claire says the marital waste argument is solid, as long as we document the business decisions correctly. Claire, her best friend since law school, an estate and family law attorney who had been in our house for holiday dinners for a decade and had hugged my daughters at their recitals and had apparently been advising my wife on how to document my business decisions as marital waste while I paid for the wine at those dinners. He'll keep the shop, she said. He loves that place more than he loves anything. Let him have it. A beat. I want the house and the lake property, Daniel. If he doesn't even know what it's worth, he can't fight for it. I stood in my driveway under the carport light with my hands at my sides, and I did not move for approximately 90 seconds. Then I walked to the corner of the carport, sat on the tailgate of my work truck, and did something I had not done in perhaps 15 years, which was to be completely still and think about nothing except exactly what I had just heard. My name is Cole Merritt. I am 46 years old. I own Merritt Restoration Works, a classic vehicle restoration and detailing operation in Gainesville, Georgia, that I started in my late 20s with a rented bay and a set of tools that had belonged to my grandfather. I now have a 4,200 square foot shop on 2 acres off the Gainesville Highway, 7 employees, a client list that spans 4 states, and a reputation in the restoration community that took 19 years to build. I am not a flashy person. I drive a 10-year-old truck, wear the same work shirts I've had for 6 years, and take a salary from the business that would surprise most people who see our portfolio work. My wife's name was Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn Aldress Merritt, 43 years old, an environmental compliance consultant whose client base had grown from local manufacturing operations to regional government contracts over the past 8 years. Smart woman, meticulous, the kind of person who read contracts the way other people read novels for pleasure, for the detail, for the gaps between what was written and what was meant. I had admired that quality in her since we were 22, and she had picked apart the lease on our first apartment with the focused attention of someone who understood that the fine print was where the actual story lived. I had admired it right up until 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in August, when I understood that she had been applying that quality to me. I went back to the Mustang. I finished the clay bar section I had started. Then I covered the car and went inside through the side door and sat at the kitchen counter with a glass of water, and I did not confront my wife, who was already upstairs in bed, because confronting someone with what you heard through a window is not preparation, it is reaction. And I had learned, in 19 years of running a restoration business, that the difference between a good outcome and a bad one was almost always the quality of your preparation. My wife thought she was dealing with a man who loved his shop more than anything and didn't see what was right in front of him. She was about to find out what I actually see. Part 2, the lake property. The next morning, I drove to my attorney's office before the shop opened. Marcus Osi was 54, a general business and property attorney who had handled the legal architecture of my shop's growth for 11 years and who had the specific quality of a person who has seen enough unexpected situations to be surprised by very few of them. I had called him at 7:30, which was earlier than I normally called anyone, and he had said, "Come in at 8." I told him what I had heard. I told him about the lake property, about Claire Whitfield's apparent involvement about the phrase marital waste documentation. I told him about Daniel, a name I had heard, but had no face for the voice on the other end of the phone that my wife had been laughing with at 11 at night. I told him all of it in the flat, organized way. I used to brief clients on complex restoration work because organized presentation of facts produces useful responses, and emotional presentation produces comfort, and comfort was not what I needed. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The lake property was conveyed to you through your father's estate as a separate inheritance. Correct, not purchased with marital funds. Correct. Dad's will was explicit. The property transferred 18 months ago. And your wife is aware of the property's existence. I told her about it when Dad died. I don't think I told her the value. I hadn't had it appraised at that point. She has apparently had it appraised." He made a note. A separate property inherited during a marriage is generally protected as separate property in Georgia. However, if marital funds have been used to maintain it, improve it, or pay taxes on it, her attorney can argue for a marital interest in the appreciated value. He looked at me. "Has any marital money been spent on the lake property?" I thought about it. The taxes had come through the estate account, which I maintained separately. The property had no improvements. I had not spent anything on it. "No," I said. "Nothing." "Good." He made another note. "The marital waste argument she apparently intends to make against your business, that's a more complex situation. It requires documenting that you made decisions with marital assets that reduce their value for the benefit of the marriage. It's a creative argument, and it's occasionally effective." What business decisions might she be referring to? I thought about the previous year. I had made two significant decisions. I had turned down a private equity acquisition offer for the shop $2.4 million because I did not want to give up operational control. And I had invested a substantial amount in a facility expansion and equipment upgrade that had not yet fully returned its investment. Both decisions were mine, and both were defensible, but I could see how an attorney building a case might characterize them as marital waste if the right documentation was assembled the wrong way. "I rejected an acquisition offer," I said, "and I did a major capital investment." Marcus nodded slowly. "She's building a case that you chose your business preferences over the marital estate's financial interests." He set his pen down. "Cole, I need to ask you a direct question. Is there anything in your marriage or your business that she could use against you in a custody proceeding or a financial proceeding that would be damaging if presented in a particular way?" I thought about my daughters, Sophie, 19, at University of Georgia in Athens, Audrey, 16, at home, doing well in school, close to both parents, as far as I could tell. I was not a perfect father. I had missed. Things worked. Too many late evenings prioritized the shop in ways that a different kind of father would not have. But I had never been cruel. never been absent in spirit, even when absent in body, never done anything that warranted the phrase emotional neglect that my wife had apparently been deploying. No, I said. Then we prepare, Marcus said, and we do it before she files. Part 3. Daniel. Finding Daniel took 4 days. I want to be specific about how I found him, because people assume that the discovery of a spouse's affair requires surveillance or private investigators or some dramatic confrontation. None of that. What it required was the same thing that every restoration job requires: careful attention to what has already been left in the open. My wife had a shared family calendar that we had used for 6 years to coordinate schedules. It was accessible to both of us through a shared account. She had never removed my access because it had never occurred to her that I would look at it with anything other than the interest of confirming pickup times and dinner reservations. I looked at it with different eyes that Wednesday morning and spent 40 minutes cross-referencing the past 8 months of her calendar entries against her stated schedule. The entries labeled J Consult appeared 11 times in 8 months, always on Tuesday evenings, always between 7 and 9:30. Gwen worked with clients and attended professional events regularly, and consultation meetings were a standard part of her calendar. I had never questioned them. I was questioning them now. The address attached to 3 of the entries was a restaurant on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. I drove past it on a Thursday afternoon on the pretext of visiting a supplier in Buckhead. It was the kind of restaurant that consultants took clients to, quiet, expensive, the sort of place where a 2-hour dinner could be charged to a professional account without much scrutiny. I found Daniel through a professional database that Marcus's office had access to. The address on 3 calendar entries matched the office building of an environmental engineering firm downtown. I searched the firm's professional directory for any name beginning with DET, had a connection to environmental compliance work, which was Gwen's professional overlap. 3 names came up. One of them was Daniel Reeve, 48, a senior partner specializing in environmental impact assessment. His professional photograph showed a man with an easy smile and the specific look of someone who had been in boardrooms long enough to be comfortable in them. He was married. His wife's name was Priya. I noted that. I did not yet know what I was going to do with it, but I noted it. The second thing I found, and this took longer, was the financial pattern. Gwen and I had maintained a joint household account for 22 years, alongside our individual professional accounts. The joint account covered mortgage, utilities, household expenses, the girls' school costs, the occasional family trip. I had not audited it carefully. In 4 years, because we had an arrangement. She managed the household account, I managed the business accounts, and the arrangement had worked for 2 decades. I pulled the household statements for 18 months and spent a Thursday evening going through them. The amounts were small individually: $160 to a florist on a Tuesday in November, a hotel charge in Atlanta for a night I remembered as a Gwen's professional development conference in Birmingham, a restaurant charge on a Tuesday in February that was twice what dinner for 2 would cost and had been coded as a household food expense, scattered, calibrated, designed to sit below the threshold of obvious in an account where $20 variations were routine. 12 months of small amounts totaled a number that was not small. I photographed every statement. I wrote down every anomalous line item with the date, the amount, and the stated code. Then I called Marcus and told him what I had found. He told me to bring everything to his office on Monday. He also gave me the name of a family law attorney he trusted and recommended I contact them before the end of the week. I contacted them Friday morning. Her name was Patricia Holloway. She had been practicing family law in the Atlanta area for 26 years and had the specific, calibrated composure of someone who has heard every version of the story I was telling and had decided at some point in her career to help the right people rather than the easy ones. She listened to everything I had. Then she said 3 things that I wrote down and kept. 1. Do not confront Gwen yet. 2. The lake property needs to be in a separate property trust by the end of the next week. 3. Document everything from this point forward in writing dated with a timestamp. I drove home that evening and ate dinner with my wife and my daughter, Audrey, who was telling a long story about a conflict in her friend group that required careful navigation. And I helped her think through the conflict and complimented her on her instinct for fairness. And I watched Gwen across the table and I thought, 22 years. I thought Jay Consult 11 times in 8 months. I thought the lake property. I did not say any of it. I helped Audrey with her problem, which was solvable. I would handle my own problem in the correct sequence. Part 4. What was in the safe? My father had been a methodical man. Roy Merritt had spent 34 years as an insurance actuary before retiring at 68, and the habits of his profession had penetrated every aspect of his personal life. The documentation, the risk assessment, the tendency to maintain records of things that other people allowed to become vague. He had kept a home safe for as long as I could remember, a fireproof floor model bolted to the concrete in the basement of his house in Anderson, South Carolina. And after he died, I had brought it to my shop rather than deal with the contents immediately, because grief is its own kind of postponement. The safe had been in the back office of Merit Restoration Works for 18 months. I knew the combination. I had opened it twice, once to confirm that the lake property deed was inside, and once when my accountant needed proof of a property transfer for the estate filing. I had not gone through it thoroughly. Gwen knew I had the safe. She did not know the combination. The morning after my first meeting with Patricia Holloway, I cleared my schedule until noon and opened the safe. What I found took 2 hours to fully catalogue. The lake property deed, as expected. A second deed I had not known about, a half-acre commercial lot adjacent to the restoration shop's current property, purchased by my father 15 years ago, and never developed, currently assessed at $212,000. My father had never mentioned it to me. The lot, backed up to the shop's access road and would, if incorporated, allow for a facility expansion that I had been constrained in planning because of the property line. A brokerage account statement from a custodial account that my father had established in my name in 1987 when I was 8 years old, and which I had apparently inherited without anyone ever explaining it to me properly. Current balance because of a specific set of index fund positions my father had been quietly managing without discussing, $437,000. A sealed envelope labeled "For Coal" with his handwriting. Inside, a 2-page letter. He had known about the account, but had chosen not to tell me while he was alive, because as he wrote, he wanted to see whether I would build something on my own before I knew I had a safety net. He had been watching the business and was proud of what I had built. He left the account to me with the instruction to use it however I chose, but to think carefully, because money compounds the same way decisions do, and the decisions made in the first hour after a discovery are rarely the best ones. A folder labeled Gwendolyn in my father's handwriting. I sat very still before I opened it. My father had been a precise man. He had been precise about everything he documented. The folder contained 6 printed pages, each one a printout from what appeared to be his own research, conducted over approximately 2 years before his death. He had been tracking Gwen's professional activities and financial registrations. 2 pages documented a pattern of consulting fees paid to a company called Aldress Environmental, Gwen's maiden name, that appeared to involve a referral relationship with Daniel Reeves' firm that created a potential conflict of interest with her government contract work. The remaining 4 pages were a chronology of meetings between Gwen and Daniel Reeve that my father had documented through publicly accessible professional event records, LinkedIn activity, and dated business publications. My father had known for 2 years before he died. He had chosen not to tell me, for reasons he did not explain in the folder, and had not had the chance to explain before his death. Instead, he had documented everything carefully and left it in the safe and trusted me to find it when I needed to. I sat in my back office for 30 minutes. Then I called Marcus. "You need to see something," I said. Part 5, The Wife He Didn't Know. Priya Reeve called me first. I had not contacted her. What had happened was that Marcus's office, in the process of researching the Aldress Environmental LLC conflict of interest angle, for the potential legal proceedings, had flagged the professional connection to Daniel Reeves' firm through a business ethics database. The flagging had generated a notification through a shared professional compliance system that Priya, as a co-signer on the firm's compliance certifications, had access to. She had put the pieces together on her own. She called my shop phone on a Wednesday morning 7 weeks after I had heard Gwen's voice through the kitchen window. She identified herself and said, "I think we may be dealing with the same situation, and I'd like to talk to you directly if you're willing." I met her at a coffee shop in Buckhead on a Thursday afternoon. She arrived first. She was 44, precise in her movements, with the specific, contained quality of someone who has had 3 weeks to process something significant and has arrived at the far side of processing where the grief has been converted into clarity. She was an accountant. She had found the discrepancies in their joint account, the same way I had found Gwen's carefully, methodically, and with the specific shock of someone who understood numbers well enough to know that the numbers were lying. She spread a folder on the table between us. Her documentation was organized differently from mine, but told a compatible story. Daniel's personal charges on their joint account that corresponded to dates in Gwen's calendar, a hotel charge in Charleston for a long weekend last spring that Daniel had attributed to a professional conference, and a series of wire transfers from their household savings to a personal account that Priya had traced to a vacation rental in the North Georgia mountains. "He's been using our savings to fund this," she said. Her voice was flat, not cold flat. The flatness of someone who has decided that emotion is not the useful register for this conversation. "So, has she?" I said. We compared the documentation for 90 minutes. The overlap was comprehensive. The vacation rental in North Georgia had been booked under a name that was neither of theirs, but the payment method. A Venmo transfer from Gwen's personal account, traced through Priya's bank statement, where the corresponding withdrawal appeared, was clearly theirs. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. "I have a family law attorney. The filing is being prepared." "Yes, so am I," she said. My attorney suggested that parallel filings with cross-referenced evidence creates a stronger evidentiary picture for both cases. She looked at me steadily. "And there is also the conflict of interest question with her government contracts. My attorney has been in contact with the state ethics board." I had not gone that far yet. Patricia had mentioned it as a possibility. Priya had already moved. "Is there anything in your documentation that you'd be willing to share?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything." She nodded once, the single nod of a person who has confirmed something they needed confirmed. "I'll have my attorney contact yours." After she left, I sat at the coffee shop table for a long time. I thought about two families being dismantled in parallel by the same two people, and about the specific intersection of Priya's careful accounting and my father's careful folder, and about the way that precision, my father's mine, Priya's, was the thing that was going to matter when everything else was stripped away. Then I drove back to the shop and got to work on the Mustang, which still needed 3 more stages before it would be ready. Part 6, The Family. Sophie came home from Athens for a long weekend in September, 2 months into the preparation process. She was 19 and in her second year of a business management program, and she had her mother's intelligence deployed in directions that were, I hoped, better oriented. She had also, over the past 2 years, developed an increasing directness that I suspected had come partly from living away from home and forming her own read of things she had been too close to while living inside them. She found me in the shop on a Saturday morning doing a paintwork correction on a client's vintage Corvette. She sat on the stool beside the workbench and watched me work for 20 minutes without speaking, which was her way when she had something she was deciding how to say. "Are you and Mum okay?" she said finally. I set down the applicator. "Why do you ask?" "'Cause Mum's been weird since August. Not sad weird, careful weird, like she's measuring things." "Geese." I looked at my older daughter. She had my tendency toward observation, and her mother's precision with language, and the combination was going to make her either very good at business or very difficult to negotiate with. Probably both. There are some things happening between your mother and me, I said. Nothing I can fully describe yet because it's in process. But you're right that something is happening. She was quiet for a moment. Is it serious? Yes. Is it about someone else? I looked at her directly. What makes you ask that? She turned the pencil over in her hands. Because Mom changed her phone passcode last spring, which she never used to have one. And last winter she came home from a work trip, and she looked not happy, but something that was trying to look like happy. I don't know. She set the pencil down. I'm not a kid, Dad. I know you're not, I said. When I know more, I'll tell you more. What I need from you right now is to not say anything to your sister. Audrey knows something's off too, Sophie said. Audrey is 16, I said. She should be 16. Sophie nodded. She picked up the pencil again. Are you scared? I thought about that honestly. No, I said. I'm prepared. That's different. She looked at me for a moment with the specific expression of a young woman reassessing the person she thought she knew. Then she stood up and hugged me, real tight, the hug of a person who has decided something, and went back into the house. I stood in the shop for a moment and thought about my daughter's Sophie, who had figured it out and was managing the knowledge with more grace than I had at 19. Audrey, who was 16 and doing well and deserved to remain in the version of her life that didn't know yet. The proceedings that were being prepared in parallel in two attorneys' offices were going to affect them both. And the only thing I could do was handle everything in a way that gave them the most stable possible path through it. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. 2 weeks later, Audrey appeared in the shop doorway on a Tuesday evening while I was doing end-of-day cleanup. She stood there for a moment the way she did when she was thinking about whether to say something. Dad, she said. Yeah. Do you know Diana Whitmore? She's in my class. I don't think so. Her mom runs a property management company. She came by the house last week to drop something off for Mom. They were talking in the kitchen, and when I came in, they both stopped. She looked at me. Diana's mom is Claire Whitmore. Claire Whitmore, not Claire Whitfield, as I had misremembered Claire Whitmore, who had been at our holiday dinners and hugged my daughters and was apparently helping my wife document my business decisions as marital waste. Okay, I said. Thank you for telling me. Audrey looked at me steadily. She was 16, but she had her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's specific quality of seeing things she wasn't supposed to see and knowing what to do with them. I don't know what's happening, she said, but I know something is, and I want you to know that whatever it is, I'm not going to be used. Nobody is going to use you, I said. Good, she said, and went back inside. I stood in the shop for a long time after that in the August dark with the smell of paint and solvent and the specific quiet of a building that has been worked in for 19 years and has absorbed some quality of the work into its walls. Then I locked up and drove home and ate dinner with my wife and my daughter and said nothing that was not true. Part 7 before the filing. Patricia Holloway filed on a Monday. The filing itself was not dramatic. It was paperwork, the legal architecture of a decision that had been building for 3 months, translated into the formal language of Georgia Family Court. What the paperwork contained was the marriage dissolution petition, the property listing that included the separate property designations with supporting documentation, the financial misconduct evidence relating to the joint account withdrawals, and the documentation of the business marital waste argument that Gwen's attorney had apparently been building preemptively, countered point by point with the actual business records, the acquisition offer documentation, the capital investment ROI projections, and the independent business valuation that Marcus had commissioned. It also contained in a separate evidentiary packet that Patricia had coordinated with Priya's attorney, the conflict of interest documentation relating to Aldress Environmental LLC and Daniel Reeves' firm, the referral relationship that potentially implicated Gwen's government, consulting contracts in an ethics violation that had already been referred to the State Ethics Board. Patricia had also moved at my request to establish the lake property as a separate property trust in my name, fully documented as inherited separate property before the filing. The commercial lot adjacent to the shop had been similarly documented. The custodial brokerage account, which Gwen had apparently not known existed, was already in my name alone through its original structure. None of it was actionable as marital property under Georgia statute, and all of it was documented. I called Marcus and Patricia the morning after the filing to confirm everything had processed correctly. Then I went to the shop and started work on a 1969 Camaro Z28 that had come in from a client in North Carolina. Gwen received the papers that afternoon at her office. I was not present for that. I was grinding rust off a 40-year-old quarter panel with the focused attention that the work required, and what was happening in a law office downtown was Patricia's work to manage, and I trusted her to manage it. Sophie called that evening. She was careful, controlled, the specific quality of a person managing their reaction for someone else's benefit. She said, "Mom called me." What did she say? That you ambushed her, that the filing was vindictive, that she didn't know about the lake property documentation. She knew about the lake property, I said. She had it appraised. A silence. I know, Sophie said quietly. She told me you were obsessed with the shop, that you never prioritized the family, that she felt invisible for years. Another pause. I know that's her version. What's your version? That you showed up, she said. Every recital and every math homework and every time Audrey got sick. You showed up. A beat. Mom was there too, but she was somewhere else in her head for a long time. I noticed that before I knew why. Your mother is a good person who made choices I don't understand, I said. That's what I need you to hold on to. Sophie was quiet for a moment. I'm going to tell her that I love her, she said. But I'm not going to take her side. I just want you to know that. That's exactly right, I said. Audrey called an hour later. She said 2 sentences. Dad, I'm okay. Don't worry about me. Then she asked whether she could get a ride to a friend's house on Friday, and I said yes, and that was the whole conversation, which told me that my younger daughter had decided that the best way she could handle this was to keep going, which was both the correct instinct and a sign that she was going to be all right. Part 8, the courtroom. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. Gwen and her attorney, a partner at a mid-size Atlanta firm named Vincent Cross, who had a reputation for aggressive pre-trial positioning, had filed a response that included the marital waste argument, a claim against a portion of the lake property's appreciated value based on a marital maintenance theory, and a challenge to the separate property designation of the brokerage account on the grounds that I had known about it during the marriage and had concealed it from the marital estate. The concealment argument was the one that concerned Patricia the most. It was creative and not without potential merit if the wrong judge received it. What it required to succeed was a finding that I had known about the account and deliberately withheld it. The truth was that I had known the account existed in a vague theoretical sense my father had mentioned once, years ago, that he had set up something for me when I was a child, but had never known the value or the custodial structure until I opened the safe. The account had never appeared on any of my financial disclosures because it had never appeared in any of my accounts. It was in my father's custodial management until his death. All of this was documented. None of it was ambiguous to anyone who read the paperwork carefully. Vincent Cross apparently did not believe that the paperwork would be read carefully. Gwen arrived at the courthouse with Claire Whitmore and Daniel Reeve. I want to be specific about this because it matters for what happened next. Gwen walked into the Fulton County Courthouse with both of them, the attorney who had been advising her on dismantling my marriage and the man she had been meeting 11 times on Tuesday evenings. She was composed and she was confident, and she walked in the way people walk when they believe they have already determined the outcome of the room they are about to enter. I was sitting in the gallery with Patricia when she came in. I watched her, and I thought about my father's letter. The decisions made in the first hour after a discovery are rarely the best ones. I had made no decisions in the first hour. I had made them in the 4th month, with documentation and attorneys and the specific advantage of a person who had been underestimated consistently and had learned to treat that underestimation as a resource. Patricia had arranged for the safe to be brought to the courthouse. Not my father's safe, a transport box document size that contained the copied and certified versions of the key documents. The safe itself had been referenced repeatedly in the pleadings as the source of the disputed brokerage account. Vincent Cross had characterized it in his filings as a concealment device. Patricia had let that characterization stand without correcting it, because Patricia is a person who understands that the moment you show your awareness is the moment you lose the advantage. The judge, the Honourable Angela Burnside, who had been on the Fulton County Family Court for 16 years, and who had, according to Patricia, a specific impatience with attorneys who took creative positions that required the court to do their research for them, called the proceedings to order. Vincent Cross presented the marital waste argument first. It was polished and specific, citing business decisions by name and amount, constructing a narrative of a husband who had chosen his professional preferences over the marital estate's financial interests. He presented the acquisition offer rejection as evidence of marital waste, the $2.4 million offer that I had declined. He presented the capital investment as additional evidence. Patricia let him finish. Then she presented the independent business valuation commissioned 8 months before the acquisition offer, which showed that the shop had been worth $2.7 million at the time of the offer, making the $2.4 million offer a below-market bid that any reasonable business owner would have declined. She presented the capital investment documentation with the 18-month ROI projections that my accountant had prepared and which showed the investment had already recovered 40% of its cost in new client contracts. She presented the acquisition offer negotiation correspondence, which showed that I had engaged seriously with the offer, had requested a revised bid, and had declined the final number because it was below the documented valuation. Not marital waste, Patricia said to Judge Burnside. Sound business management that a reasonable person in Jason's position would have made by any objective standard. Vincent Cross pivoted to the brokerage account concealment argument. Patricia opened the document box. She presented my father's estate filing, which listed the custodial account as an asset discovered during estate administration, dated 14 months ago, 3 months before the lake property appraisal that Gwen had commissioned. She presented my father's letter, in which he described the account's history and his reason for not disclosing it to me during his lifetime. She presented the account's custodial history, showing unbroken management by Roy Merritt, from its establishment in 1987 until his death, with no activity or access by me during the marriage. Not concealment, Patricia said. Discovery of an inherited asset that predated the marriage by 37 years and was managed entirely outside my knowledge or control until my father's death. Then Patricia presented the joint account documentation, the 12 months of anomalous charges, the hotel charge for the conference in Birmingham on the night Gwen was actually in Atlanta, the florist charge on a Tuesday in November. The vacation rental Priya's attorney had traced to the North Georgia mountains, cross-referenced with Gwen's calendar. Judge Burnside looked at Gwen's attorney. Mr. Cross, she said, I need a response to this documentation. Vincent Cross requested a recess. Judge Burnside gave him 20 minutes. I sat at the counsel table with Patricia and looked at the table's surface and thought about nothing in particular, which is what I do when I am waiting for something I have already prepared for. Gwen looked at me once during the recess. Not the confident look of someone who had walked into the room certain of the outcome. Something different. The specific look of a person who has just understood that the room is not the room they thought it was. When proceedings resumed, Vincent Cross had 3 fewer arguments than he had arrived with. The marital waste claim was withdrawn. The brokerage account concealment claim was withdrawn. What remained was the standard asset division proceeding which Patricia had been prepared for since October. Claire Whitmore had left the courtroom during the recess. I noted her absence and did not comment on it. Part 9, what happened after. The settlement was reached 4 weeks after the hearing. The lake property remained mine as separate inherited property. The commercial lot remained mine as separately inherited property. The brokerage account remained mine as a separately inherited custodial asset. The marital home, a four-bedroom colonial in the Gainesville suburb that Gwen and I had bought 12 years ago and renovated over 3 years, was divided according to its appraised value, with Gwen receiving half of the equity after accounting for the documented joint account withdrawals, which reduced her share proportionally. The business was mine. It had always been mine. Started before the marriage, operated as a separate business entity throughout with no marital funds invested. Patricia had made this clear in the initial filing, and it had never been seriously contested once the marital waste argument collapsed. Sophie and Audrey remained primarily with me, not by court order, by their own stated preferences, expressed clearly to the family mediator, who interviewed them both separately. Sophie was 19, and her preference was not legally binding, but it was communicated. Audrey was 16, and her preference carried weight. They would maintain a relationship with their mother on whatever schedule worked for all of them, and I was not going to structure that relationship around legal minimums or maximum leverage. That was a decision I had made consciously and with consideration, because Gwen was their mother, and whatever she had done to our marriage, she had been a genuinely present parent for their entire lives, and children, who are used as instruments in their parents' divorces, pay the cost of that for decades. I was not going to let my daughters carry that cost. Claire Whitmore's involvement in advising Gwen while being a practicing attorney created a separate professional conduct issue that Patricia had referred to the State Bar of Georgia. I did not pursue it further. The referral was accurate and the bar's process was its own. What happened from there was not my business to manage. The conflict of interest question regarding Aldress Environmental, LLC, and Daniel Reeves' firm was under review by the State Ethics Board. Gwen's government consulting contracts had been placed under administrative hold pending the review's outcome. This was consequential for her professional trajectory in ways that I had not engineered but had documented accurately. And the distinction between those two things mattered to me. Priya filed her divorce petition on the same Tuesday that ours was settled. Daniel Reeves' firm had placed him on administrative leave while the conflict of interest review proceeded. The vacation rental in North Georgia, it emerged during Priya's proceedings, had been booked with joint savings that Daniel had moved without disclosure. Priya's documentation was comprehensive, and her outcome was, by the accounts I heard third-hand, comparable to mine. I called her once a week after both filings were closed. I told her I was glad her proceedings had resolved cleanly. She said the same to me. We have not spoken since, which felt like the correct ending to something that had been a functional alliance rather than a friendship. What she had given me, the calendar confirmation, the vacation rental trace. The professional ethics angle had been material to my case. What I had given her was probably material to hers. Two people who had been handed the same problem by the same two people had faced it together and could now face the afterward separately. That was sufficient. Part 10, the Mustang. I finished the Mustang in December. The client, a 63-year-old retired contractor named Bill Sutherland, who had been restoring this car in the gaps between a 40-year career and who had trusted me with the final stage because, as he said, he didn't want to be the one who ruined it in the last quarter mile, came to the shop on a Friday afternoon to see it. I had rolled it out of the bay onto the apron in front of the shop in the winter afternoon light that does specific things to a correctly finished paintwork, and when Bill came around the corner and saw it, he stopped walking. He stood at the edge of the apron for perhaps 30 seconds without speaking, which was the response I had been working toward. "She's perfect," he said finally. I didn't know if he was talking to me or to the car. I helped him take it through its orientation, the mechanical notes, the maintenance schedule, the specific care instructions for the paintwork that had taken 11 days to execute correctly. We went through everything methodically because Bill was a man who understood methodical. And then he shook my hand and wrote the check and drove the Mustang out of my parking lot and turned south toward the highway. Sophie and I ate dinner at the kitchen table that evening. She had come home for the weekend from Athens. Audrey was doing a school overnight. The house was quieter than it used to be, with 4 people in it, and had the specific quality of a space being reorganized around a different number of inhabitants. "How's the shop?" Sophie asked. "Good, Sasson," I said. "Finished the Mustang today?" "The 67? Yeah." She nodded. "Good. I always liked that car." We ate for a while in comfortable silence. Sophie was different since September, not harder, but more settled, as if the knowledge of what had been happening had resolved something that had been sitting uncertain in her for longer than she had named. "Mom called me this week," she said. "How is she?" Sophie looked at me for a moment. She's having a hard time," she said honestly. "The government contracts are on hold. The thing with Claire, she's in a furnished apartment downtown." A pause. "She asked me if I thought you'd ever be willing to have a conversation. Not about the divorce, just a conversation." I sat with that for a moment. "Tell her I'm not unreachable," I said. "But tell her it's going to take time." Sophie nodded. "That's fair." She picked up her fork. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Did you ever think about not fighting it? About just letting her have some of it and being done?" I thought about the question seriously. About the lake property. About the brokerage account. About the commercial lot that backed up to the shop's property line. About my father's letter and his note about compound decisions. "The things I fought for were things I built, or things my father built," I said. "Not fighting for them would have meant deciding that someone else had more right to them than the people who made them. I don't believe that." Geeky. Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Grandpa would have liked how you handled this." I thought about my father's folder in the safe, about the 2 years of documentation he had kept and never shown me, because he trusted me to find it when I needed it. About the chocolate candies in the plastic-wrapped shoebox, the ones I had found first, that had seemed like the whole story, before I understood that the folder was the real message. About what it means to leave someone the right tools and trust them to know when to use them. "Yeah," I said. "I think so too." Audrey came home Sunday afternoon, dropped off by a friend's parent carrying a weekend bag and the specific energy of a person who has spent 48 hours in someone else's normal routine and found it clarifying. She set her bag down and came into the kitchen and stood at the counter. "Dad," she said, "is it okay if I have my friend Petra over this weekend?" "Yes," I said. "Hey, and is it okay if we work on the porch? She's helping me with a project for history." "Sure, son." She poured herself a glass of water. Then, without looking up, "I went to see Mum yesterday." I set down the book I was reading. "She looks tired," Audrey said, "but she asked about you, whether you were okay. I told her you were working." She drank some water. "I told her you finished the Mustang." She looked up at me. "She said you always finish what you start." I sat with that for a long time. "She's right about that," I said. Audrey nodded. She picked up her bag and headed upstairs. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. "Dad, when the history project is done, can you show me and Petra around the shop? She's never seen a restoration up close." "Any time," I said. She went to her room. I sat in the kitchen for a while longer in the specific quiet of a house that was reorganizing itself around a different structure, and I thought about what my father had written. The decisions made in the first hour after a discovery are rarely the best ones. I had not made any decisions in the first hour. I had made them in the 4th month in Marcus's office, in Patricia's office, at a coffee table, with Priya in the back office of my shop, with the safe open in front of me. I had made them carefully in sequence with the preparation that everything I valued had always deserved. The shop was mine. The lake property was mine. The commercial lot was mine. And in the spring, I was going to break ground on the expansion that the lot made possible, which would add 2 more bays and allow me to take on the kind of large format restorations that I had been turning down for 3 years because I didn't have the space. My daughters were going to be all right. Both of them, in their different ways, were already more than all right. They were becoming the kind of people who knew how to navigate hard things without losing themselves in them, which was all I had ever wanted for them. The Mustang was finished. The next car was already in the shop. A 1971 Chevelle S S454 brought in from a client in Tennessee who had been looking for the right hands for 2 years before being referred to me. It needed everything. It was going to take 8 months to do correctly. I looked forward to every hour of it. My shop, my work, my daughters. Everything that was mine was still mine. And the safe in the back office held my father's letter, which I had read 6 times since I found it, and intended to read many more. Because some things deserve to be returned to, not for what they tell you about the past, but for what they remind you about who you were trusted to become. I had become him. I was still becoming him. That was sufficient. That was more than sufficient. That was. In the end, the only inheritance that mattered. The end. Cast of characters. Cole Merritt, owner. Merritt Restoration Works, Gainesville, Georgia. 46. 19 years of building a shop from a rented bay and a set of his grandfather's tools. A man who was underestimated so consistently that he learned to treat underestimation as an asset. Gwendolyn, Gwen, Alderus Merritt. Environmental compliance consultant. 43. 22 years of marriage, 2 daughters, a professional reputation built on meticulous documentation, and a decision made at some point in the last 2 years that cost her everything she had planned to take. Daniel Reeve, senior partner, environmental engineering firm, Atlanta. 48. Administrative leave. His firm's conflict of interest review ongoing. Priya Reeve, accountant. 44. Found the discrepancies herself. Moved faster than anyone expected. Her proceedings resolved cleanly. Sophie Merritt Cole's older daughter. 19, University of Georgia. Her father's observation, her mother's precision, her own directness. Told her father she wasn't going to take sides, and meant it. Audrey Merritt Cole's younger daughter. 16. Her great-grandmother's eyes. Told her father she wasn't going to be used, and meant that, too. Marcus Osei. General business and property attorney. 54. Handled the shop's legal architecture for 11 years. Found the commercial lot adjacent to the shop in the estate paperwork. Patricia Holloway, family law attorney, Atlanta. 26 years of practice. Helped the right people rather than the easy ones. Claire Whitmore, estate and family law attorney. Gwen's best friend since law school. Left the courtroom during the recess. State bar referral filed. Roy Merritt Cole's father. Insurance actuary, retired. Kept a safe. Kept a folder. Trusted his son to find it when he needed it. Never made a decision in the first hour after a discovery. Part 11, Roy Merritt's folder. I want to tell you about my father, because the folder he left in the safe is not a peripheral detail of this story. It is the center of it. Roy Merritt had grown up in Anderson County, South Carolina, the son of a mill worker who had taught him 2 things. That careful attention to the details other people skipped was the most reliable form of advantage available to a man without inherited position, and that you never tell someone what you know until you understand what they're going to do with it. He had applied both principles to a 34-year career as an insurance actuary, where the work was precisely the translation of risk into numbers and the numbers into decisions, and he had brought them home with him every evening and applied them to the raising of his only son with the same methodical care. He was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He did not hug easily or express things directly. What he did instead was show up for everything on time, having done his homework, prepared to be useful. When I was 11 and building a model engine from a kit that was beyond my level, he sat next to me at the workbench for 3 evenings and did not do any of the work himself, but asked the right questions in the right sequence until I figured out each step on my own. When I was in my mid-20s and had just rented the bay and started the business with more confidence than capital, he drove 4 hours from Anderson to Gainesville and spent a day walking through the space, and then sat with me that evening over dinner and said, "You've thought about the workflow, but you haven't thought about the client relationship," and then proceeded to explain the client relationship in terms I could use. He did not tell me about the brokerage account. He did not tell me about the commercial lot. He did not tell me about the folder labeled Gwendolyn. What he did instead was put them in the safe, and he left me the combination in a letter that was tucked inside my mother's recipe box in his kitchen. which I had found and kept because it was in her handwriting, even though I hadn't understood at the time why it contained a combination. I had understood eventually. I opened the safe 18 months after his death and found the full picture he had assembled. The brokerage account, which he had been quietly managing on my behalf since I was 8 years old. The commercial lot, which he had purchased 15 years ago, when he saw that the property adjacent to my shop would eventually either become a problem or become an opportunity, and had decided to make it an opportunity in advance. The folder which he had assembled over 2 years because he saw something in the pattern of Gwendolyn's professional activities and her relationship with Daniel Reeve that concerned him, and which he had documented instead of telling me because he knew that I would need evidence, not advice, and that he might not be around to provide the evidence when I needed it most. He had been diagnosed with heart disease 4 years before his death. He had not told me until the last year. He had spent those 4 years putting things in order, not for his own comfort, but for mine. I sat in my back office with the folder in my hands and thought about my father, and I thought about what it means to love someone in the specific way that prepares them rather than protects them. My father could have told me what he suspected about Gwendolyn. He could have sat me down and had the conversation and let me deal with the information in real time, before I had the documentation or the legal preparation or the parallel documentation from Priya. He could have done any of that. Instead, he had assembled the evidence and put it in the safe and trusted me to find it when I needed it. He had known me well enough to know that I would be ready when I found it. And he had known Gwendolyn well enough to know that the documentation would matter more than the suspicion. And he had known from 34 years of assessing risk for a living that the intersection of those two things, my readiness and the documentation, was the correct preparation for the moment that was eventually going to arrive. I had opened the safe and found my father inside it. Not his grief, not his worry, not the weight of what he had known and carried alone for 2 years, while I polished other people's cars and pretended my marriage was something it was no longer. Just his preparation, his faith that I would use it correctly. I had used it correctly. He had been right to trust me. That mattered more than any of the legal outcomes. Part 12. The garage in December. The December after the hearing, I made 3 changes to the shop. The first was that I hired a second lead restoration specialist, a woman named Keiko Tanaka, who had been doing paintwork for a competing shop in Decatur for 9 years and had a portfolio that I had been watching with professional envy for the past 2 of them. She came on board at the start of December and immediately made the shop's output better in ways that were visible to clients and satisfying to work alongside. The second was that I accepted a commission for a 1969 Boss 429 Mustang that I had been declining for 2 years because I didn't have the space or the bandwidth. The Chevelle from Tennessee was in Bay 1. The Boss 429 would come in January. The expansion on the commercial lot was scheduled to break ground in April. The third was that I called Bill Sutherland, the retired contractor, who had brought me the 67 Mustang, and asked if I could refer a client to his contractor company for the expansion project. He said he'd be glad to look at it and came by the following Tuesday with his site manager. And we walked the commercial lot together, and he talked about what was possible and what it would cost and what the timeline looked like. He was precise and unhurried, the way good contractors are, and by the end of the site walk, I had a realistic picture of what the spring was going to require. On the drive home that evening, I called Sophie. She answered on the second ring, background noise of a campus library behind her. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "Nothing urgent, just wanted to tell you something." "What?" "The expansion is moving forward. I'm going to break ground in April." She was quiet for a moment. "The lot Grandpa bought?" "Yeah." Another moment of quiet. He would have loved to see that. "I think he did see it," I said, "when he bought it." "Yeet." Sophie laughed, a real laugh, clear and sudden. The kind that comes out of unexpected pleasure. "Yeah," she said. "He probably drew up the whole project in his head before he wrote the check." "Probably," I said. We talked for 20 minutes about her classes, about a project she was working on, about the holidays, and whether she was coming home. When we hung up, I sat in my truck in a gas station parking lot off the highway and watched the Georgia December dark do its specific thing. The cold, with a quality different from the cold further north, not as sharp, but not as gentle as people assume. Just itself the cold of a place that knows its own nature and doesn't apologize. I thought about what my father had built, the account that had been growing since 1987, the lot he had purchased 15 years ago, the folder he had assembled because he saw something I hadn't let myself see. All of it left in a safe with a combination in my mother's recipe box, waiting for the moment I was ready to use it. I thought about what I had built, the shop from a rented bay and a set of inherited tools, the client relationships, the employees, the portfolio that brought cars from 4 states, the daughters who were going to be all right, the life that was already in December, beginning to feel like the right shape rather than the old shape minus something. I thought about Gwendolyn. Not with anger, I had not had much anger at any point, which surprised people when they found out. Patricia had noted it in our first meeting as an asset. People who are not angry are harder to rattle and harder to characterize as vindictive, which matters in family court. But it was not strategic absence of anger. It was genuine. I had been hurt. I had been betrayed. I had lost 22 years of a version of my life that had turned out to be something other than what I believed it was. But anger at Gwendolyn specifically had never been the dominant feeling. Clarity had been the dominant feeling. The specific, useful clarity of a man who has understood the complete picture and has decided what to do with it. I drove home, made dinner, sat in the garage after dinner with the shop door open and the cold coming in a little, listening to the way a building sounds when it's empty and familiar, the creak of the insulation settling the distant highway noise, the specific smell of paint and metal, and years of work embedded in every surface. 19 years in these walls. The expansion would change the footprint, but not the character. Character is what gets into the walls. I looked at the safe in the corner of the back office, visible through the interior window. My father's safe now, in my shop, now holding the documents of my own life, rather than his. I thought about the next thing I was going to put in it. Not documents of betrayal or caution, but the expansion plans, the commission contracts, the evidence of what was being built next. That was the right use of a safe, not storage of damage, storage of progress. I locked up and went to bed and slept well, which I had been doing since October, when the preparation had been complete and there was nothing left to do but wait for the work to show itself. The Chevelle was in Bay 1. The boss, 429, was coming in January. The expansion was breaking ground in April. I had everything I needed. I was ready to start. Part 13. What Sophie understood. 2 weeks after the December phone call, Sophie came home for the winter break. She arrived on a Thursday evening with a duffel bag and a box of things from her dorm that needed to come home for the holiday, and she moved through the house with the particular efficiency of a person who has been living independently for a year and a half and has developed specific opinions about the organization of shared spaces. She rearranged the spice rack without comment. She noted that the throw blanket in the living room needed washing and washed it. She asked about Audrey's school schedule with the focused interest of an older sibling who has been away long enough to want the specific information rather than the general picture. On Friday afternoon, she came to the shop. I was at the workbench doing a paint correction on a panel section of the Chevelle when she arrived. She did the thing she had been doing since she was old enough to visit the shop, found the stool near the window, sat down and watched. She had always had an instinct for not interrupting work at the critical moment, which I had appreciated since she was 8 years old, and had sat in that same spot, watching me work on a client's Trans Am with the focused attention of a person who understood even then that there were moments when silence was the correct companionship. She let me finish the correction. Then she said, "Can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Yes." "When you found Grandpa's folder, the one about Mum, were you angry at him for not telling you?" I set down the applicator and thought about it genuinely because it was a question that deserved a genuine answer. "No," I said, "not at all." Why not? Because he understood something that I would have argued with if he had told me directly. He knew I would have defended your mother. Not from blindness, from loyalty. It's what you do when you've been with someone for 20 years. You find the explanation that keeps the thing intact. I looked at Sophie. If he had shown me the folder 3 years ago, I would have found a reason why the professional relationship was a coincidence, and the pattern wasn't a pattern. I would have told him he was seeing things that weren't there. Oh. Sophie was quiet for a moment. But he left you the documentation so that when you found it yourself, you were ready to see it. Yes, I said. He trusted that you'd get there on your own. He trusted the process, I said. He knew that if he just planted the information correctly, the rest would unfold in the right sequence. Sophie turned her phone over in her hands. That's very specifically him, she said. He was the same way with me. When I was having that situation with my roommate last spring, you remember I told you about it. He didn't tell me what to do. He asked me one question. He said, "What are you hoping to protect?" And then he said nothing else. She looked at me. I figured it out from the question. I had not known about this conversation. My father had never mentioned it. He had maintained a relationship with both my daughters that was separate from his relationship with me, which I had always known in a general way, but had apparently not fully understood. He talked to you about the roommate situation, I asked. He talked to me about a lot of things, she said, especially in his last year. He called me every Sunday morning. We talked for about an hour each time. She smiled a small smile that held something tender. He talked about you a lot, about the business, about the decisions you made, about the way you handled things. He told me once that he had never shown you the most important thing he had built, the way he built it, because he needed to know if you'd build it the same way on your own before he told you. She looked at her hands. I didn't know what that meant until this year. I sat down on the workbench stool. He meant the methodology, I said. The patience, she said. The preparation. The trust that the right moment would come, and that you'd be ready when it did. She looked at me directly. He watched you build the shop, and he saw that you had it. The same thing he had. He just wanted to confirm it before he... She stopped. He died knowing you had it. I think that's why the safe was the way it was. He wasn't worried about you. He was just making sure you had the right tools. I did not say anything for a long time. Sophie stood up and put the stool back against the wall. I'm going to make dinner, she said. Audrey texted that she's coming home at 6. She paused at the shop door. Dad, he would have been very proud of how you handled this. You're the second person to say that, I said. Then we're both right. She walked back to the house. I sat at the workbench for another 30 minutes. The Chevelle's panel section was ready for the next stage. I noted where I had left off and covered the work and put the tools away in their correct positions, the way my grandfather had taught me, and the way I had done it every evening for 19 years. Because the position of the tools, when you return to the work, determines the quality of the continuation. Then I went inside to help with dinner. Part 14, Spring. The groundbreaking was on a Thursday in April. Bill Sutherland's crew had been on site since the previous Monday, and by Thursday, the foundation prep was complete, and the first concrete was being poured for the expansion footings. I had brought the shop's employees out at noon. Keiko and the 6 others who had been with me for anywhere from 1 year to 11, and Bill had shaken everyone's hand with the solid directness of a man who respects other people's work because he respects his own, and we had stood in the April Georgia sun and watched the concrete trucks do their work. Sophie had driven down from Athens for the day. She stood next to me in the afternoon light with her hands in her pockets and watched the machinery and said nothing for most of it, which was what I had always loved about her company. At one point, Audrey, who had been doing homework in the shop office, came out and stood on the other side of me and watched the excavation for a few minutes. It's bigger than I thought, she said. 2 new bays, I said, plus storage and a dedicated paint room. Grandpa's lot, she said. Grandpa's lot. She nodded once satisfied and went back inside to finish her homework. Sophie watched her go. Then she said, You're going to be all right, you know. I looked at the concrete going in. The work proceeding at exactly the pace it needed to proceed. The measurements correct the foundation square, the whole thing unfolding according to a plan that had been prepared for months before the first pour. I know, I said. The expansion would be done by September. The boss, 429, was already in bay. 2-3 months into what I estimated would be a 7-month restoration. Keiko had taken on 2 additional clients whose previous restoration shops had closed, expanding the shop's active commissions in a way that justified the expansion's economics before it was even complete. The lake property I had visited in March for the first time since inheriting it, driving up on a Saturday morning, getting out of the truck, standing at the edge of the cleared area that looked out over the water. The property was undeveloped. The view was significant. The possibilities were multiple, and none of them needed to be decided immediately. I had stood at the edge of the lake property for 20 minutes and then driven back to Gainesville. The safe deposit box at the bank now held the lake property deed alongside the commercial lot deed, alongside the brokerage account documentation, alongside the expansion plans. My father's safe in the back office of the shop held the folder and the letter and the other documents that were not the kind of thing you kept in a bank vault, the kind you needed to be able to find in the middle of the night, when you needed to remind yourself of what you knew and why it mattered. Gwendolyn and I had spoken twice since the settlement. Both times were about the girls' scheduling questions, practical logistics. Both times the conversations were brief and accurate and civil, which was the version of ongoing contact that I intended to maintain for as long as the girls needed us to maintain it. She was rebuilding her professional situation with the government contracts on hold. The Ethics Board review had concluded with a finding of improper conduct and a formal reprimand, which was less severe than it might have been, but more significant than it would have been without Priya's documentation. She had changed firms. She was doing the work of recovery. I had not forgiven her in the clean, performative sense that people sometimes want from these situations, the scene where both parties acknowledge the past and release it and move forward, lighter. That was not available to me, and I did not pursue it. What I had was the accurate understanding of what had happened, who had been responsible for which portions of it, and what the correct forward path looked like for my daughters and for myself. That was sufficient. That was in fact everything the situation required. The concrete cured, the footings set. Bill Sutherland's crew began framing the walls of what would become 2 additional restoration bays and a paint room. And the shop's physical footprint began to expand in the direction of the property line that my father had quietly acquired 15 years ago against exactly this moment. I stood in the April afternoon and watched it happen. My shop, my father's lot, my daughters, one doing homework in the office, one standing beside me in the sun. The work proceeding in correct sequence, each step building on the step before it. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped, every foundation set correctly before the next level was begun. The Georgia spring does what it does, warm, suddenly green everywhere, the light getting longer every day. In the shop, the Chevelle was almost done. In Bay, 2, the Boss 429 was revealing itself, stage by stage, from under 40 years of neglect and bad decisions. In April, the right work done in the right order produces something that nobody can take from you because you built it with your own hands and your own preparation and your own understanding of what the next step required. That is what my father understood. That is what he left me in the safe, in the folder, in the account, in the lot. Not money and property, though those mattered, but the proof that preparation is itself a form of love, that the person who puts the right tools in the right place and trusts you to know when to use them believes in you completely, in the specific way that only comes from actually watching you work. He believed in me completely. The safe had held that belief for 18 months, waiting for the moment I was ready to receive it. I had opened the safe. I had received it. I had used it exactly the way he would have wanted. The concrete was curing. The framing was beginning. The spring was doing what springs do. I went back to work.